So I want to relate this to the newest documentary of the Night Stalker, of something that's very clear with the Richard Ramirez case, with a lot of serial killer cases, is that Richard Ramirez, there are 14 murders that are attributed to him, but there were obviously more, if not just murders, then sexual assaults of victims that we don't know about.
What makes you say obviously?
All right, maybe not obviously because I'm not a detective, but if you use the Golden State Killer just as an example, he had a bunch of sexual assault victims before he murdered anybody. And they say, you know, a lot of these killers, the reason they'll stop is either they got caught or they aged out. But you have someone like Richard Ramirez, who he murders a 9-year-old girl in San Francisco in 1984. And then a year later in 1985, he starts his murder spree.
Wait, Richard Ramirez murdered a 9-year-old girl?
Yes, in 1984.
Was that in the doc?
I don't know if it was in the documentary.
Is that a fact?
Yes, that's a fact because...
How could that not be in the doc? I don't remember that. I thought the thing about the children was that he let them go.
And he also was kidnapping children at the same time. He murdered a 9-year-old girl in 1984 in San Francisco. They didn't know about it until after he was already convicted. It was something of through DNA evidence.
Oh, did he admit it though? Didn't he? He said something like there's more or whatever.
He admitted like that there were more. The girl who was the girl who was killed in San Francisco in 84. It wasn't until like the early 2000s that through DNA evidence they were able to find out that it was Richard Ramirez. So you have the Night Stalker killings, which is this 7-month killing spree in Los Angeles in 85. But then you see a year later he had committed a murder. So what's he doing for that year? If he's not, if those are the only people he murdered, then he's probably still sexually assaulting people. If he's also during this killing spree, he's kidnapping young children, then he was probably also doing that. And you know, you see with Joseph D'Angelo of they graduate to murder.
Yeah.
They're committing crimes and then graduating to murder. So even before his first, you know, murder in 1984, there were probably victims before that.
I think that's fair to say.
I think that's fair to say too. But if you look at, you know, the way Michelle McNamara would look at it is all those victims matter, and all those victims need justice. It's not enough that just Richard Ramirez got caught and now he's dead. You know, you need, it's important, the confirmation, the court confirmation this person was guilty of your crime, and then you know for a fact that this guy who did this horrible thing to me is behind bars. It's important for the victim to have.
Sure. I mean, if they choose to. Some people don't, like, you know, for instance, I know somebody, I don't know them personally, but my very good friend works for a company. The president of that company, who's a woman, was raped by Bill Cosby. She has never come out and said it publicly.
Right.
Because she has chosen that she doesn't even want any of that associated with her or her company whatsoever, even though there's 60 other victims or whatever the case is. But, you know, so, but my point is, like, it's essentially up to the person. Yeah, but I guess that case is different because she knows who did that to her. Got it. Where if you were a little kid in the early 80s and you don't know that this man who came into your bedroom in the middle of the night was Richard Ramirez, you know, that confirmation could be very important. No, I definitely get that. Yeah. Also, I brought this up in the breakdown of just keeping on like Richard Ramirez and like Ted Bundy and how they're portrayed in media currently. Right. You don't watch American Horror Story. No. Okay. The way that Richard Ramirez is portrayed in American Horror Story is fucking insulting. Isn't that a fiction? Yes.
It is.
But they utilize real people?
They utilize real people, and basically the Richard Ramirez is kind of becomes like a love interest of one of the characters. And they like kind of portray him as like almost this misunderstood bad boy of like he's kind of like this gruff motorcycle dude, and like it's a serious problem, especially when you consider the fact that he has victims that are still alive who are seeing that, or in like having Zac Efron play Ted Bundy and portraying him as like the way people fictionalize Ted Bundy, because Ted Bundy was not like this suave killer who seduced his victims. Like he was known as
up on them.
He snuck up on them.
Yeah.
He tricked them by either pretending to be a police officer or pretending
he needed help,
or pretending he needed help. And this idea that the Zac Efron movie very much puts it like in the forefront, and the documentary like Confessions of a Killer talk about it a lot, this like idea that Ted Bundy seduced his victims, of like kind of he was this Casanova serial killer. Like that's not true. It's
just another layer of sexism.
That's how Ted Bundy wanted to portray himself, not how he actually was. And I feel like the fact that everyone's leaning into how the serial killer wanted to be portrayed and not how he was actually in real life is kind of a slap in the face to the victims. Well, look, and again, it's another layer of sexism.
We're dealing with a genre that profits off of telling horrific personal stories that happen to people.
Right.
So, the question becomes, what's the line?
Exactly.
Like, what is Netflix like? Are we to believe that there isn't some element of that going on in the recent Richard Ramirez Netflix documentary? Maybe not outright, but at the end of the day, they're still making probably millions of dollars off of portraying this guy.
That's
true.
Is
it more egregious if it's so over the top and they're making him a cool motorcycle guy who gets the chicks or something? Probably. But at the end of the day, like, it's all kind of... It's weird, man. It's a fine line because it's
why
also...
I like I'll Be Gone in the Dark, because I'll Be Gone in the Dark is very much of like, it's a call to arms of just like, we have to catch this guy. Of like, this guy's been on the loose for 30 years, like his victims don't have justice and we need to get this guy. And
I mean, it's also like Michelle McNamara was basically, some kind of tortured artist type, because I mean, I'm not making any sort of judgments. I'm just saying how it's portrayed on film. Is like, this was a person who was, taking painkillers, and not in a healthy way, if there is such a thing. But also, I mean, her work habits, like she was, working in her bed. Yeah. Like that's not a sign of health.
Right.
I was thinking jelly beans, like pilled out, like working at 3 a.m, like in your bed. That's not a sign of health.
No, not at all.
And obviously I don't know. She had some problems, clearly.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much of
again. This isn't a judgment thing.
It's
it is what it is. It's
not a judgment thing. And there's nothing to like misjudge about it.
Right.
It's it's a serious problem, and like, she was obsessive of wanting to catch this guy. Yeah. To the point where it kind of ruined her.
I guess,
unless she had those problems before this, which I have no idea.
We can't speak intelligently on that. We're just going off of what we see. Does it look like someone who like went off the deep end? Like,
right.
Clearly. But again, addiction, Yeah. The addiction doesn't discriminate. It could get anybody. Right. It's too bad that she's not around to kind of...
It is. It's horrible.
It is. I mean,
that's one of like the most... It's such a heartbreaking scene of like the day he's caught, and they kind of have Patton Oswalt on camera coming out, and he's like clearly so upset of like wishing that Michelle could have been here to see this.
It's wild, like how the whole timeline is crazy. Pat, yeah, and then like what Patton Oswalt and their daughter had to go through is like, ugh.
Right, because Patton Oswalt is saying like, you know, the day Michelle died was the second worst day of my life. The next day after, when I had to tell my daughter what happened, that was the worst day of my life.
Yeah.
You know, horrible.
You know, and luckily he's remarried. I guess he's happy.
Yeah, he's remarried now.
I guess his daughter obviously lives with him.
I mean, yeah, I'm assuming he's remarried now. His new special just came out on Netflix.
Shout out
pretty
to
good.
Patton Oswalt.
No, Pat, he's great. And you know, and his wife helped catch a serial killer, or at least put the pressure on the police to find the serial killer, or at least like just making sure that it never came out of the public consciousness of just like, we need to catch this guy.
And really like organize. The thing is that, you know, if you want to really know the effect of Michelle McNamara, like without taking anything away from her, I think it's a little strong to say that she, you know, caught the killer.
Right.
What caught the killer was genealogical DNA.
Yeah.
That Paul Holes and law enforcement were behind.
Yeah.
What she did, and which is totally, you know, amazing and super influential, is coalesced, you know, the movement around it, put a name to it. The Golden State Killer, organized it and brought it out of the darkness, if you will.
Yeah.
Because again, in the documentary, Richard Shelby, or one of the former detectives, talks about he wasn't even necessarily the most prolific rapist of that time.
Yeah,
and we don't know who those people are,
which is even more insane.
Right. But the point is, we don't know who those people are.
Going back to like the statute of limitation thing,
they got to redo. They have to
how
redo
insane is it that there is a more prolific serial rapist than the East Area rapist?
Richard Shelby was saying multiple,
who could come forward tomorrow and there's nothing the law could do about it.
I don't know. They got to redo that law.